Hi, and welcome back to Family Sociology. Now we're going to cover Bringing Up Baby, Part 1. Now, you might already be aware that the socialization of children often begins with parents and other members of the immediate family. Parenting styles can have different effects on children, but so can the structure of the family. Now, structure of the family is things such as number of people in the family, the marital status of the parents, the gender, age, and education of the parents' the education of the parents. Now, the interaction with siblings are also important in child development. As children mature, they become into contact with other agents of socialization. Now, we'll get into that later in this particular part, where things like child care workers, teachers, peers, they all are agents of socialization. Now, the influence of traditional media and the growing impact of social media on children and families is significant. Now, in this chapter, it considers a number of aspects of socialization and concludes with a discussion of children and parental happiness. Now, if we're going to start off this discussion, we should probably look at what is socialization. Socialization, a process of passing on cultural knowledge of how to survive and how to take part in social life, is passed on to each generation. It's a cradle-to-grave process, meaning it's from childhood to old age. And now, while we usually assume socialization occurs in childhood, this process, however, continues throughout adulthood. This learning could occur through explicit instruction that's done formally, like in a school or in Cubs, Girl Guides, Scouts, but it can also be done informally and through subtle interactions and behaviors of others, and through the observation of people's behaviors like parents, siblings, peers, and acquaintances. That's more informal. Now, through socialization, individuals develop a sense of identity, of status, and the roles that they'll play in society. A child participates actively in the socialization process and also makes choices about their behavior. Now, we're going to start with an interesting topic, defining children. It's an interesting heading. As a society, we have defined what is a child differently over time. So how we socialize children reflects what we expect of their future, and it reflects the value we place on them specifically. Now, in the early years in Canada, children were often employed. An 1873 Nova Scotia law dictates that boys aged 10 or older can work underground in coal mines. There are many examples of child exploitation in Canada's history. It was in a time where children were what known as economic assets. They contributed to the family. Many hands makes light work. The 20th century saw the arrival of the economically worthless child, but the emotionally priceless child. So they were expected to provide emotional satisfaction for the parents. Now, this was the beginning of a period of time that we call childhood. There wasn't a childhood prior to this time. Increasingly, childhood came to be regarded as a special time and was increasingly differentiated from adulthood. We'll now consider the factors that influence these changes and the growth and development of children. And we're going to begin with parents, or the first socializers. They make direct and indirect influence on their children. Parenting style, where they live, all influences where they go to school and what friends they have. And we're also going to explore such factors as the number of children in a family, the marital status, the sexual orientation, and the age of the parents and the child's parent figures, their education. This all helps shape the child. So we're going to begin by looking at starting the family structure. Now, you'll pay attention to figure 6.1. And we're going to start with lone parent families. Children who grow up in two-parent families, one-parent families, and step-families have different socialization experiences. Children living in single-parent homes face higher risks of lower academic achievement. They often will have some degree of trouble with the law and some other milestones that can lead to changes in later life. Now, it's important to note, and I have to really emphasize this, single parenting is not entirely a negative outcome for children. Most research today looks at single parenting in a broad light, seeing other explanations for these challenges like fewer financial resources, single parents home with some income and is not the same as having two incomes. The outcomes are not the same. So now let's also touch base on the marital status issue. When comparing children from married and cohabitating couples, for example, the children of married couples have only slightly better emotional and cognitive ability. Longitudinal studies on children show achievement found very little difference between the two family types. Now, should all things be equal, income, education, and such, there's not much difference between married and cohabitating couples and their children, other than the individual differences that all families have. Now, if we touch base on same-sex parents, the growth in the number is significant, especially after 2005. That was the year that same-sex marriages became legal. There are, in fact, some advantages of same-sex couples raising children. A significant point is that same-sex female couples spend more time with their children than heterosexual couples or same-sex male couples. It continues that things like psychological well-being and peer relationship, academic achievement, alcohol and drug use, and delinquency are also not really a lot different than heterosexual couples. So what does still continue is the stigmatization that children may experience. Society still considers, to some degree, that the heterosexual mom and dad is normal. Our sociological imagination, remember, personal, that the same-sex families and public, the social policies and the social expectations. The legalization of same-sex marriages is going to improve this view. Now we can look at the gender of parents. Even though many still subscribe to the belief that a mom and dad heterosexual is best, it's more often recognized that the sex of the child's parent has little to do with success as do the family structure and the experiences within a family. So let's look also now at what role does parental education play. And this is one of the strongest predictive factors of child success, is that the parent's educational level. Higher educated parents promote learning, provide resources for education. When parents have less education, their preschoolers tend to watch more TV and read less. Later school performances is related to early experiences with books. Does age of the parents mean anything? The age at which parents have a baby has a strong influence on the child's development. Mature parents are more apt to be financially stable. They can often provide enriching experiences such as museum visits or travel. Older women, however, are at greater risk for problems in pregnancy. They are likelier to use reproductive technologies as a result, at risk of multiple births. Young mothers lack financial and social resources to overcome the physical disadvantages, likely to be raised in a single-parent home or with grandparents. Teens finding their own identity may be impatient with limits on their activities. So family size. Is there an ideal family size? Well, not so much. It varies depending upon country, region, and time. Generally, whether small or large family, there are benefits and limitations to both, and the overall family size doesn't make a big difference on the child's experience. Birth order effects. Now, this is an area that has much research and outcomes are variable. So many variables Single child, 3 siblings, 6 siblings, all male, all female, all have different results. These are results depicting birth order issues. However, birth order issues are not inevitable. What about the extended family? Grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins. Like other factors, the extended family involvement is almost a non-issue. With extended families, children can see grandparents more often and benefit from the perspective and knowledge. Now let's move to the effects on family interactions. This is the stuff that happens at the micro perspective of socialization, the face-to-face parenting approaches and outcomes for children. It's easy to say that parenting can be challenging. Girls, for example, used to observe and help their mothers with childcare issues, thus being socialized to bear and raise and socialize their children. Today, parenting is a bit like the past. It's largely based on research of best practices. Good parenting can be taught and learned. We're going to explore Diana Boehmeren's research to sort of look at some parenting styles. You'll see this in the infographic 6.1 in your textbook. Quality of parenting and day-to-day treatment affects children's well-being. So let's start with the authoritarian parents. Now the authoritarian parents are more like drill sergeant types. They demand but are unresponsive. The discipline style involves scolding, even yelling, and corporal punishment. That could include spanking, for example. Now, this approach can produce some challenging results. Children grow up in an authoritarian families tend to become submissive and unable to make decisions for themselves or defiant and rebellious. Now, a second type is known as the permissive parent. They're quick to respond, but demand little from their children. They tend not to set very many limits, and they don't respect individuality. Sometimes they're not clear as to whether they are parents or friends. Now, this approach, too, has consequences that are limiting. Children from permissive families are likelier to exhibit problem behavior and not perform well in school. Now, don't get this mixed up with authoritarian, but the third family is the authoritative. Now, the authoritative parents take the middle position. They have high expectations, but are responsible to their children's needs. They based on consistent parent and significantly more positive interactions with each other. Children from the authoritative families are often described as achievers and as competent and friendly. And the fourth group is known as the uninvolved parents, they're often low in demands and low in responsiveness. Parents tend to be cold and distant, even hostile to the child's need for attention. Can be a result of preoccupied parents doing multiple jobs, long hours, resulting in being very tired and uninvolved. Children with uninvolved parents are more likely to have poor academic performances and weak social skills, as well as most behavioral problems. Since, as it turns out, Diana only used white middle-class two-parent families in her research, subsequent research has found some additional variations one is called the no-nonsense. Now, this emerged when researchers looked at low-income black single mothers. It was suggested that it was adopted as a protection for their children given where they lived, in relatively or very unsafe neighborhoods. The second additional stage or type of parenting style was attachment parenting, which was coined more recently, and it includes more attention to the child's needs and wants, not as a set of rules, but more as an approach to parenting. It's worth noting that all these parenting styles can and may be affected by every child's personality. So parenting needs to be more intentional rather than learning as we go, sort of on the wing. Both the mother and father each have their own background experience on how each has been parented, and they have varied influences and values. Therefore, intentional parenting is about communication between the parents. How do we want to be as a parent? What rules, if any, do we want to set? Routines, discipline, activities, interactions. Plan a family. Plan your parenting. Now that's a really important statement to be making. And a lot of times we think we've done thorough and complete planning, but have we? Do we talk about how we're going to discipline our children? Do we talk about what kind of routines, traditions, and activities we're going to do? Do we talk about how we're going to interact with our children, with one another, and with them together? How do we want them to interact with us? There's a lot of planning in a family and planning your parenting. Well, that's the end of part 1, folks. We're going to do part 2, and it'll be in this week. So let's carry on the good fight, and we'll see you in part 2. Bye now.